Welcome to today's webinar on strengths-based development. Joe Folkman and I are delighted to be with you to review what we think is a really important topic in the world of learning and development today. We want to begin by just going back in time a little bit and talking about the evolution of thinking about strengths. In my opinion, it all began with Peter Drucker back in the 1960s, and I'm going to, if I may, just take a moment and read to you a couple of sentences that Peter Drucker wrote in his original book, The Effective Executive. And he said this, and I quote, "The effective executive makes strengths productive. He knows that one cannot build on weakness. To achieve results, one has to use all the available strengths, the strengths of associates, the strengths of the superior, and one's own strengths. These strengths are the true opportunities. To make strengths productive is the unique purpose of organizations. It cannot, of course, overcome the weakness with which each of us is abundantly endowed, but it can make them irrelevant. Its task is to use the strength of each man, or I'm sure today he would say each man and woman, as a building block for joint performance." And so, as early as the 1960s, Peter Drucker was talking very eloquently about the importance of strengths. The next kind of major force, in my opinion, in this world of strengths-based development came from Martin Seligman. In 1990, he published a book called Learned Optimism. Seligman was distinguished because during the time when he was the president of the American Psychological Association, he launched a giant crusade to try to transform psychology from always focusing on the dark side to begin talking about the positive things in life, and to encourage people not just to look at sociopathic behavior and depression and sociopathic behavior, but indeed to talk about success and happiness and joy and effectiveness. The next big thing that happened, I think, in the strengths movement was in 2001, a couple of people named Marcus Buckingham and Jim Clifton kind of published a book called Now Discover Your Strengths. In that book, they talked about the fact that a strength combines talent, skill, and knowledge. They would argue that talent was basically fixed by the age of 15, and the book really focused on individual contributors more than leaders, but they said that strengths were a consistent, near-perfect performance that individuals brought to the table. They went on to say that talents are natural gifts that can't be learned. They were the result of kind of strong synaptic connections in the brain. That therefore developing a strength requires some natural talent. For instance, they would say that confronting others is a talent, while selling is a skill. And while it may be hard to make that distinction between talents and skills, that's how they would define it. And they argued that success in life comes from using your talents more of the time, every day, and that what the organization needs is not quite as important of an issue as what the individual wants and needs for their success. We joined the party in the year 2002, coming with a somewhat different focus. Rather than based upon any clinical evidence that we had from our work with leaders, we tried to say, what does the data say? Our research was based on 360-degree feedback that we had on some 20,000 leaders. We had some 200,000 of these 360-degree feedback assessments. What we learned from that research was that statistically, the people who were the very best leaders were there because they possessed a small number of strengths, that is, qualities or characteristics that would be up at the 90th percentile. I think the other thing that we tried to do was to say that, yes, it's important to know what is in the individual, what the individual is passionate about. But it's also important to kind of factor in, what does the organization need? The organization is often paying the bill for all developmental activities. And so we believe that using the 360-degree feedback process was the most cost-effective, most accurate, most valid measure of strengths. And therefore we, in the year 2002, published a book called The Extraordinary Leader. Later in 2011, we published a book called How to Be Exceptional that was describing how strengths are developed, and not just helping people to identify their strengths, but to talk about specifically what are the tools and techniques that can be used to develop these strengths. So there you have a brief walk through history. As it played out, Marcus Buckingham left the Gallup organization in the year 2011, published a book called Stand Out, and Marcus is now proposing a new definition of strengths. He argues that no longer is it important to say what is somebody necessarily good at, but much more the important test is a strength is something that makes you stronger, that you eagerly anticipate doing, that you lose track of time when you're engaged in it, and that therefore you feel stronger afterward. He's not a big fan of the 360-degree feedback process. He argues that you are the best judge of your strengths, and that external opinions aren't all that important. Therefore, he no longer uses StrengthsFinder as a way of identifying strengths, and pays not much attention to what the organization needs from its employees, but has done a great deal to popularize the notion of strengths, and therefore has really accelerated the acceptance of this strengths movement.
And Jack, he tends to define strengths the way we define passion.
Yeah.
And so, strength is something that makes you stronger. Strength is something you'd love to do. That's passion in our view.
Right. So from these differing points of view, we would invite the listeners to kind of make their own decision, make their choice. We happen to think that 360-degree feedback is the best measure of a strength. We think that as people move up in the organization, their answers indicate that they have less opportunity to always do the things they enjoy, and sometimes need to do the things that the organization requires of them. We think, therefore, that the organization need issue needs to be given very strong consideration, and that one can't expect that the world will always give you a job that exactly matches your passion. So that kind of lays out some of the options, and Joe's now going to talk with you about the impact of career derailers or fatal flaws.
Thanks, Jack. And for us, if you think you're really good at something but nobody else does, guess what? That's not a strength. Well, I wanted to look at data and sort of identify what it's telling us. And so I grabbed individual assessments that illustrate points. One of the things that we found in our original research is that we said you ought to focus on your strengths, that 80% of the time you're better off focus on your strengths. But occasionally, 20 to 30% of the time, people have something we call a fatal flaw. We define a fatal flaw as a competency at the 10th percentile. What you see here in this profile here is the impact of fatal flaws. This person has 4 fatal flaws. As you can see here, their overall average effectiveness rating of people with 1 or more fatal flaws is at the 17th percentile. So it craters your effectiveness. It really makes you less effective. Notice the employee engagement is around the 21st percentile. So not only does the leader perform badly, but the employees are disengaged that work for him. Our recommendation for people with fatal flaws? Fix them.
No surprise. Mm-hmm.
And the good news is that we found a surprisingly high percentage of people who get R360 and have fatal flaws end up fixing the fatal flaw, moving from the 20th to around the 50th percentile. So, wonder if you don't have any fatal flaws. Well, that should be good news, right? But as you can see here, people who with no fatal flaw, right, but no profound strengths, their average effectiveness is the 37th percentile, right? So even though you don't have a fatal flaw, it doesn't seem to help you much. And again, their average performance is, they're below average in their performance. Next, you look at people who are above average in their performance. And a lot of times people really think about this as the way to move forward. They think about, hey, the way I'm going to move forward is to work on my weakness, push it up, work on my weakness, push it up. As you can see here, this person has pushed every one of their weaknesses above average. And the question is, well, what does that get you in terms of effectiveness? Well, this person, on average, people who are above average in terms of their competencies, the majority of their competencies, their average effectiveness rating is the 64th percentile. Now, notice the consistency they have in terms of being really pretty good at almost everything. So one way to get to the 64th percentile is to be really good at almost everything. Let me show you another way. Let's say that you were really good at one thing. You had one profound strength, and that's what that shows here. That you notice the variation in the data, the competencies, but what happens here is this person actually is at the 65th percentile. And so it's like, which is easier, being good at almost everything or standing out on something? Because standing out on one thing, on average, pushes you to the 65th percentile. And then the next one was what happens if you were good at three things, if you had three profound strengths? And that gets you to the 80th percentile. Employee engagement is at the 80th percentile. So what we've seen in the data is this whole dynamic around the impact of strengths. Our original study was done with several thousand leaders. I just wanted to replicate that study here with 65,000 leaders. and just to show you the data here that says, if you don't have any strengths, your average effectiveness is the 37th percentile. If you did one thing well, it pops up to the 65th. If you do three things well, it's at the 80th, and five things well, you're at the 86th. There's an impact to strengths. It's not the absence of weakness that makes people great. It's the presence of strength. And just like great organizations, they're not perfect, but they stand out on a few things. They differentiate themselves on a few things. And that's what leaders can do if they can stand out on a few things. So, again, our logic for how leaders ought to improve is if you have a fatal flaw, focus on that, fix it. But if not, and that's about 80% of the leaders, build a profound strength, make a difference. And our insight that we gain from this is you don't have to be perfect to be an extraordinary leader. This is my favorite insight, Jack, because it's
very comforting.
Well, as you all know, and I know perfectly well, I'm not perfect, but if I can do a few things well, it can make a difference for the firm, and it can make a difference for me. We ask the question, well, is this different for males versus females? What's interesting is it's very close. But there was a fascinating difference here that comes that if females with one profound strength, they were at the 71st percentile. On average, males were at the 67th percentile. And I kind of scratched my head on that, Jack. I don't know why that is exactly, but that's statistically different. And it appears that strength building for females can actually even be more effective.
More powerful.
Yeah. There's another analysis we did that we looked at age groups. Does it make any difference if you're an older leader or a younger leader? And you can see that the younger leaders, it has a little more profound effect, but but it's pretty much consistent across the board. That almost leaders at every level, get a real benefit from strength building. And this next one looked across the world. And people ask the question, well, is this different in Asia or the Middle East or Central America or Europe? The answer is no, although you can see that in North America there's a more profound effect for strength building slightly. But the consistency, and that's what we've seen as we've spread this news across the world with our distributors, that building strengths affects and has a positive effect on almost everybody in every culture. So, Jack, what happens to engagement?
So certainly one of the things that's being talked about a great deal these days is how do we improve employee engagement, employee commitment. So this slide portrays the fact that leaders with profound strengths have higher employee engagement. And let's just look at what this chart tells us. So the leader with no fatal flaws but no strengths is down around the 34th percentile or so. If this leader is basically below average on most of the competencies that we measure, overall, this leader is at maybe the 45th percentile. If, on the other hand, they're above average, but they don't particularly have any profound strength, then they get up to being about the 55th percentile. But look what happens when strengths kick in. And we're defining strengths as some competency at the 90th percentile. Notice that with just one strength, this person now equals the individual who is above average on virtually, many of them. Then two strengths, they move upward to nearly the 60th percentile, and then you see what happens. Three strengths, 63rd, four strengths, 65th, until finally we get to the fifth strength, and they're nearing the 70th percentile in terms of their overall effectiveness. This pattern of the power of strengths was one of the great discoveries from analyzing large bodies of data coming from 360-degree feedback. So as we think about this whole issue that we opened this webinar about, is our challenge to discover strengths, or is it necessary to kind of help you discover them and then figure out ways to build them? We believe very strongly that discovering strengths can be useful, but that for most leaders, they need to build strengths which are needed by the organization for which they work. It does help when you choose a strength for it to be something that you are passionate about, something that you enjoy doing, something that truly energizes you. This is your passion, and often those passions are very tightly correlated with strengths. As a rule, there is a positive relationship, but there are some things to consider. Sometimes we are passionate about something and that it energizes us, and we're good at it. But it's also true that we may be passionate about something that other people observing it would say, I'm not sure that's really your strength. So singing in the shower may be something you love to do, but not necessarily the greatest talent that you have, greatest ability. So what is a strength? We believe that it's something that other people would assess as they look at you and observe your behavior. They would say, this is really exceptional. And we believe, therefore, that the best assessment of a strength is not your opinion, but is the collective opinion of those people with whom you work.
Jack, one of the things we've done is we've done some pre-post studies, and one of the studies we did looked at people who went through that 360 process, went through that strength building process. Does it work? Does it have an effectiveness? Well, 57% showed a positive improvement in their overall effectiveness going from, in a kind of a 2-year period from a pre-test to a post-test. In the pre-test, on average, these leaders had about 1.56 strengths, but in the post-test, they ended up having on average 4.29 strengths per person. So you can see that, again, that improvement as they develop strengths, our measurement says that this actually works, that people can develop strengths, that you can be better at something. One of our favorite authors is Carol Dweck, and she talks about this fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, and telling people that these are what you're good at. You can't be good at anything else. That's a fixed mindset.
Absolutely, and it really is a wonderful reaffirmation of the fact that the human brain is quite malleable and behavior can be changed and people can grow and get smarter and get more effective as leaders. And to have data like this is very reassuring.
Pretty depressing to me when you tell me, look, here's what you're good at. You're not ever going to be good at anything else. Good luck. So you better find a job where you can use your strengths.
Your current strengths.
Your current strengths, because you're not going to be good at anything else. That's kind of depressing to me. Well, how do you improve a strength? I was thinking about self-improvement, all right? So I did what any normal person would do. I went to Google and I looked for ways to improve myself. What I found were a series of interesting posters. And aren't these great as you look at these? Jack, any of those that you any of those things you like there?
Oh, I like decide, commit, succeed.
Well, that's good. A goal without a plan is just a wish.
Yeah.
Be fearless in pursuit of what sets your soul on fire. These kind of motivate you, right? But what don't they do?
They don't last. They're fleeting.
And people
will tell you how. They don't
I mean, you put them up in your office, you post them on the walls, you put them on your computer screen, but they're sort of mottos. They might be inspirational, but there's no action involved. There's no specific, and so as you think about this question of how do you build a strength, it takes more than just kind of great little sayings and insights and things like that to build a strength. So as we first came across this whole idea of strength building, we faced a dilemma. How do you build a strength? What do people do to kind of go from good to great, and what's the process? And as we studied that, as we looked at that, we researched and we went to our database. Instead of sort of trying to kind of intuit this ourselves, we looked at the data. We looked at the best leaders, and we said, what were they doing that made a difference? So on a competency like self-improvement, we looked at research from thousands of individuals on thousands of managers. And what we found was, when we looked at the data, was that there were some specific behaviors that enabled self-improvement to occur. We call these companion behaviors, and we've really done an enormous amount of research. We have a library of 50 or 60 of these sets of companion behaviors on competencies. And what they do is they give us clues as to the how, right? So I want to self-improve. I read a bunch of posters. I don't have anything. But as I look at this model, what it gives me is the behaviors that when people were great at self-improvement and self-development, they also did these behaviors. Isn't it fascinating that the number one way to improve yourself is to listen? Right? You ever know somebody who says they want to self-improve, but when you try to say, well, try this, they go, no, don't, I don't, talk to the hand or something like that. What these these companion behaviors do is they lead people to specific action. And the big difference that we found we've made in helping people improve is moving them from a kind of a general thought, I want to improve self-development, to a real specific plan. And as you see here, this person kind of capitalized on listening and risk-taking and wrote out in specific detail what one or two things they could do to listen better and to take more risks. Now, what we find is that our theory was that this stuff works. And we spent a lot of time through the years saying to people the way to improve is to utilize these companion behaviors. Recently, we had somebody ask us, do you have any rock-solid evidence this really works, right? And so what, again, the theory is this linear process runs out of gas. If you're not good at technical expertise, you take classes and read books. But if you want to move from good to great, you've already taken the classes, you already read the books. So you need to use that nonlinear development, and we just showed you an example of that. Our theory is the companion behaviors help people improve. So the question that we asked, or we were asked, was, do you have any solid evidence that improving companion competencies causes improvement in the competency being developed? Now, to answer this question, we went to a database of 882 leaders where we'd done pre-post tests on the leaders. 157 of those leaders made a significant improvement in inspires and motivates others. Now, the companion behaviors for inspires and motivates others are these 10 behaviors: making the emotional connection, establishing stretch goals, right? So our theory was if you work on these companion behaviors, it's going to help you to be more inspiring. That's the theory. So did it work? Well, we looked at people that made a significant improvement, those 157 leaders. Now, they actually moved from the 33rd to the 73rd percentile in terms of their ability to inspire.
Which is really dramatic.
Huge shift, 40 percentile points. And each of the 46 behaviors in the remaining survey were compared in the pre-post test results. So we looked at, what really got improved. And what we found was that when we looked at the top 25 behaviors that showed the most significant improvement, we found that 22 of the 25 were associated with the 10 companion behaviors. In other words, the things that were showing up as creating the greatest improvement were the behaviors, the companion behaviors, exactly the things that we said. Only one of the companion behaviors didn't show up in the top 25. It was in the next set, 26 through 30. But another way to look at this data is to look at this graph, which shows you the improvement in inspires and motivates others. And then there's the 10 companion behaviors below that, and you can see the improvement there. Well, this was helpful. Now, what we think we have here is, does A cause B or does B cause A, or do they both, impact each other? The study does provide some additional evidence on the usefulness of the approach. We know that leaders can improve, and poor leaders can become good leaders, and good leaders become great leaders. Companion behaviors provide a variety of different paths to improvement, and individual leaders can choose the path that fits them best. Our competitors provide you only a linear approach. So most of the people in our field, all they talk about is linear development. We're the only ones that really talk about this nonlinear development. We think this is the secret to how and why people improve. Jack, any reactions as you look at this data?
Well, I think it's very useful to have that kind of supplemental data. I mean, it is hard to prove this relationship between the companion behaviors and the differentiating competencies. But this certainly provides a lot more ammunition and provides a much stronger kind of evidence that these things go together. And I think logic will tell you that when two things go together, something is happening, and usually you can kind of figure out what that is. I had an old statistics professor in college who, talked about the problem of things that are correlated don't always necessarily cause one another. And he said, obviously we know that when you walk outside at night and you listen to the crickets chirping, that the warmer the night, the more frequent will be the crickets chirping, and the cooler the night, it'll be less frequent. And one student in the back of the class raised his hand and he said, does that mean that as the temperature goes up that the crickets chirp more? And the professor said, well, no, I've always thought that it was if the crickets chirp more that the temperature went up. And the class, of course, broke out in raucous laughter. It's pretty obvious that there are relationships between these two things, and it's usually fairly easy to tell, yeah, that does cause the other. So when people become better listeners, they are more inspiring to other people. And you can begin to see the nature of that relationship and why these companion behaviors really do drive the one competency that we're wanting to improve.
And we know that this inspires and motivates others. It's a very difficult competency to improve. The companion behaviors give you the secret. They give you the formula. And what we've tested is that people that improve the companion behaviors improve the competency.
Yep.
Pretty good evidence.
Strong evidence.
All right, so let's talk about the benefits of strengths-based development. When we first started this process of focusing on strengths versus the weakness, what we noticed is clients loved it. I mean, I spent 25 years bringing people in, giving them 360 feedback and saying to them, yeah, figure out why you're such a loser. For some reason, managers didn't like that. I don't know why. But we changed the story to kind of say to people, figure out what your strengths are and find your strengths. And it was such a different message. And what we found is that this whole idea of building strengths just makes the experience of getting feedback more positive. People love to do it, and they want to improve. And we've even found that people with fatal flaws are more comfortable working on the fatal flaws when we have the strengths-based message.
Yeah, certainly for the past 12 or 13 years, as we've gone out and talked to not only the people in the HR community, but particularly when you talk to line managers and you talk to them about this idea that you should build on strengths rather than finding people's weaknesses and, kind of rubbing salt in the wound, virtually 99% of the senior executives I've talked to have said, that makes real sense to me, and that really resonates with me. And this is, executives that I've worked with in the high-tech industry, in the data world, healthcare, everywhere you go, when you talk about this fundamental idea of do we want to focus on people's weaknesses or do we want to focus on people's strengths, to a person, they invariably say, this really feels better. This makes great sense to us. And, it goes all the way back to our friend Peter Drucker. The purpose of an organization is to leverage people's strengths and to make their weaknesses irrelevant. That really sums it up.
Well, let's just close this webinar by giving you some examples of the impact of strengths. Now, if you are a high-potential executive and you have no profound strengths, the probability that you'll be asked to create an action plan for immediate improvement, 82%.
So let me stop you for a moment, Joe. So what you're saying is that there are a number of people who end up being miscategorized. They're defined as being a high potential, but they really don't have any strengths to warrant that.
We actually found, depending on the organization, between 17% and 5% of the executives who were considered high potential were actually in the bottom quartile in terms of their leadership effectiveness. So people thought they were a high potential, but obviously when they looked at it, they were actually told that they really need to do some immediate improvement. Now, they may be high potential around hitting results or accomplishing some things, but on their interpersonal skills and leadership skills, they weren't.
So the bottom line is that if you've been categorized as high potential and you don't have a profound strength, there's a great likelihood that you're going to be asked to kind of work on developing something in the near term.
Yeah, and because the expectation is you're a high potential. You ought to have a profound strength.
You ought to.
In performance reviews, if you have no profound strengths, the probability that you'll be giving a rating of meets expectations, in other words, your average, 64%. What's the difference in sales for store managers in Mexico with profound strengths? Huge difference in terms of the millions of pesos that they created. Those with profound strengths sold twice as much. What's the difference in sales and regional managers in the U.S. with profound strengths? Again, those without strengths, just barely over 200 million. Those with strengths, 450 million. So twice as much. In terms of employee engagement, managers without strengths, the engagement of their direct reports, 45th percentile. Engagement of people with profound strengths, 68th percentile. The percentage of people that think about quitting, leaders with no strengths, 31% of their people are thinking about quitting. People with profound strengths, leaders with profound strengths, only 19. And again, the percentage of highly committed employees, the percentage of people that are willing to give 100% of the effort, leaders with no strengths, 29%, leaders with profound strengths, 52%. Boy, the evidence...
It is very strong.
It's clear. And what we've tried to do in this webinar is just really give you this strong evidence for this wonderful message. Here's what's surprising to me. I was recently at Yale University doing a workshop, and I'd sometimes think that everybody's heard this, that this is a message that most people wouldn't find surprising. I'm always amazed at how many people just come up at the end of our workshops and say, "You've changed my life. You've changed the way I think about things. You've changed the way I want to deal with my kids and the way I want to deal with my spouse and the way I want to deal with my direct reports at work." This whole idea of building strengths is a new thought I've never had.
Yeah.
Now, at one level, I think, what a shame, because we haven't got this message out, that there are so many people out there that don't understand the power of strength. So I hope you'll spread the news and spread the message, and hopefully if you have questions about this webinar, about our strength-building approach and the power that this can have for your organization, let us know. We'd love to tell you more. So thanks so much.